In the vast, silent theater of the desert, destiny is not written in the stars, but etched in the sand by a single, defiant act of impossible compassion. The sun beat down upon the Arizona earth, baking it into a cracked, pale canvas under a vast, unforgiving sky. Eliza guided her weary horse through the shimmering heat, her worn calico dress clinging to her skin. The family ranch, Barren Gulch, was a testament to hardship, its wood weathered and gray. Then, a dark shape against the rust-colored rocks caught her eye. It was unnatural, a smudge of stillness in a world of whispering wind and skittering lizards. Her hand instinctively went to the rifle in its scabbard. Caution was a currency more valuable than gold in this land, and she had learned to spend it wisely. She slowed her horse to a walk, her heart beginning a slow, heavy drum against her ribs, echoing the silence of the desert. Closer, the shape resolved into a man, an Apache warrior by his buckskin leggings and the single feather in his dark hair. He was unmoving, a deep gash on his side staining his tunic dark red. Stories she had heard in town of brutal raids and merciless heathens flooded her mind, urging her to turn back, to ride away and forget what she had seen. Yet, his face, though streaked with dirt and blood, held no malice. It was the face of a man in agony, his breath a shallow rasp. Her father had always taught her that compassion was not a weakness. In that moment, seeing only a dying human being, she chose her father's lesson over the town's prejudice. Her fear did not vanish, but her pity became stronger. She dismounted, her boots sinking into the hot sand. Kneeling beside him, she uncorked her canteen and let a trickle of precious water moisten his cracked lips. He stirred, his dark eyes flickering open for a moment, clouded with pain but holding a flicker of awareness. Getting him to his feet was a monumental struggle. He was heavy, a dead weight against her slight frame, but desperation gave her strength. Leaning on her, he staggered towards her horse. The journey to the old, abandoned barn at the edge of their property was a blur of dust, sweat, and whispered words of encouragement. Each step was a risk, each shadow a potential witness to her crime of compassion. This act could ruin them. Inside the dusty twilight of the barn, she settled him on a pile of old hay. The air was thick, with the scent of dry wood and forgotten seasons. She cleaned his wound as best she could with a strip of cloth from her petticoat, her hands trembling slightly. He watched her with an unnerving intensity, his silence a heavy blanket in the small space. When she finished, she stood back, the gravity of her actions finally settling upon her. She had brought a wolf into the fold, a man her people considered an enemy. He was no longer just a finding in the desert. He was her secret, a dangerous truth hidden in the shadows of Barren Gulch, a secret that could bring everything crashing down. For 3 days, the barn was his sanctuary and her prison. The warrior, who had whispered his name was Tosh Unko, slowly regained a sliver of his strength. Eliza smuggled him broth and bread, moving like a ghost between the house and the barn under the cover of darkness. They did not speak much. Words were a barrier between their worlds. Instead, they communicated through the quiet language of shared glances, a nod of gratitude from him, a look of gentle concern from her. In the stillness, a fragile understanding began to grow. She saw not the savage of folklore, but a man of quiet dignity, his eyes holding the depth of the mountains he called home. And he saw not just a woman, but a spirit of unexpected kindness. The rumble of a buggy announced the arrival of Silas Blackwood. Dressed in a fine black coat and a polished hat, he was the picture of prosperity, a stark contrast to the dusty poverty of the ranch. He was her fiancé, an arrangement made by her ailing father to secure their future. Silas's smile never reached his cold, calculating eyes. "Eliza, my dear," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "You look troubled. Is this desolate place finally wearing you down?" His gaze swept over the ranch, not with affection, but with the cold assessment of an auctioneer. He was not marrying her, he was acquiring the land her family had bled for, and she was simply part of the transaction. Silas's visits became more frequent, his presence a suffocating weight. He noticed things. A missing loaf of bread. A poultice of herbs she had prepared, claiming it was for a lame horse. "You are becoming secretive, Eliza," he remarked one evening, trapping her hand in his. His grip was surprisingly strong, a hint of the cruelty that lay beneath his polished veneer. A good wife has no secrets from her husband. His suspicion was a palpable thing, coiling in the air between them. Eliza felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. She was walking a tightrope over a canyon, with Silas on one side and her secret in the barn on the other. That night she found Tashanko standing, leaning against a post, his silhouette framed by the moonlight filtering through the cracks in the barn wall. He had been listening. He could not understand the words, but he understood the tone of a predator. He looked at her, and for the first time spoke a clear sentence in halting English. "He is a man with a shadow for a soul." The observation was so simple, so accurate, it stole her breath. It was a confirmation of the fear she held deep in her heart. In that moment, her secret guest felt more like an ally than the man who was supposed to be her future husband. The lines of her world were blurring. As Tashanko's body healed, his spirit began to mend as well. In the quiet evenings, by the light of a single, carefully shielded lantern in the barn, he began to talk. He spoke of his people, the Chiricahua Apache, and of the man they called El Diablo. This man, a ruthless Mexican contrabandista, had ambushed his small party. "He does not want only passage," Tashanko explained, his voice low and raspy. "He wants the maps of the old ones, maps to the silver veins in our sacred mountains." He spoke of a legacy, of protecting the land that gave his people life, a duty passed down through generations. Eliza listened, captivated, the world outside the barn fading away. She saw him differently now. The story stripped away the layers of prejudice she had grown up with, revealing a man bound by honor and tradition. He was not a savage bent on destruction, but a guardian fighting for his heritage. A strange warmth bloomed in her chest as she watched him speak, his face animated by the flickering lantern light. It was a dangerous feeling, a spark of connection that threatened to ignite into a wildfire. She found herself looking forward to their secret meetings, to the low murmur of his voice sharing the soul of his people. This was a deeper intimacy than any she had ever known with Silas, whose touch was cold and proprietary. The threat, however, was no longer a distant story. One afternoon, two rough-looking men on horseback rode up to the ranch house. They were heavily armed, their eyes hard and searching. They spoke in Spanish to her father, asking if he had seen a wounded Apache. Her father, frail and oblivious, shook his head. But Eliza, watching from the window, felt her blood run cold. She recognized the cruel glint in their eyes from Tashanko's description. They were El Diablo's men. They were close. The danger was no longer a secret shared in a barn. It was standing on her doorstep, casting a long, dark shadow over their lives. Later, she told Tashanko about the visitors. He stood, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains as if he could will himself there. "They will not stop," he said. "El Diablo is like a starving coyote. He will keep circling." He then turned to her, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "You have put yourself in great danger for me, Eliza. Why?" The question hung in the air between them, simple yet profound. She had no easy answer. She only knew that leaving him to die in the desert had not been an option. And now, abandoning him to his enemies was equally unthinkable. Eliza's younger sister, Lily, lived in a world woven from dime novels and fantastical dreams. At 16, she was restless, chafing against the poverty and monotony of their life. She often sat on the porch, listening with wide eyes as Silas spoke to his men. One evening she overheard a hushed conversation about Apache gold, a treasure protected by ancient spirits. Silas scoffed at the idea, but the seed was planted in Lily's fertile imagination. Gold. The word shimmered in her mind, a magical solution to all their problems. She could buy her father medicine, save the ranch, and escape this dusty prison for a life of adventure. She did not understand that the men were speaking of silver, the same silver Tashanko had sworn to protect. In her mind, it was a glorious hoard of glittering gold coins, just waiting to be discovered. A few days later, she saw one of the men who had visited the ranch, one of El Diablo's scouts, riding out from the nearby town of Dusty Tombstone. He rode with a purpose that Lily mistook for a secret mission. This was her chance. Fueled by a potent mixture of naivete and desperation, she made a decision. She would follow him. She would find the treasure and become the hero of her own story, the savior of her family. In the dead of night, Lily scribbled a hasty note, leaving it on her pillow. It spoke vaguely of a secret adventure to secure their future. Then, she slipped out of the house, taking a small satchel with a bit of bread and a canteen of water. She crept to the corral and saddled the oldest, most docile mare, her heart pounding with a thrilling mix of fear and excitement. The desert at night was a different world, filled with strange sounds and looming shadows, but her vision of gold was a shining beacon that drove her forward. She kept a safe distance, a small, determined shadow, trailing a much larger, more dangerous one across the moonlit landscape. Her childish fantasy was a dangerous game she did not understand. The man she was following was not a treasure hunter. He was a ruthless criminal returning to his camp. Every step she took was a step deeper into the jaws of the very wolf her sister was trying to keep at bay. Lily imagined herself returning with her saddlebags full of gold nuggets, the look of shock and pride on Eliza's face. She did not imagine the cold reality of men who would not hesitate to harm a young girl who stumbled upon their secrets. Her innocent dream of rescue was setting the stage for a tragedy she could not possibly foresee. The presence of El Diablo's men grew more brazen. They no longer asked questions from a distance. One morning, Eliza found fresh horse tracks circling the barn, too close for comfort. They were scouting, hunting, tightening the net around their prey. Tashenko felt it too. He grew restless, his calm demeanor replaced by the coiled tension of a cornered animal. "They know," he said, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. "They can smell a secret like a snake smells fear." The barn, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. The fragile peace they had built was crumbling under the weight of the encroaching threat, and time was running out. Silas chose this moment to strike. He cornered Eliza in the main house, his charming facade stripped away to reveal the cold, hard man beneath. "I know you are hiding him, Eliza," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "I have known for weeks. The town is talking. They say your father is harboring one of those heathens." He presented his ultimatum, his words like the snap of a steel trap. "You will marry me by the end of the week. And you will give me the savage. If you refuse, I will tell the sheriff your father is an accomplice to murder. They will take this land, and your father will die in a cell." His cruelty was breathtaking, leaving her no room to breathe. She was caught. A terrible vice was squeezing her from both sides. To her left were El Diablo's bandits, violent and unpredictable. To her right was Silas, a monster disguised in a gentleman's suit, using the law as his weapon. Betraying Tashenko meant condemning a man who had shown her nothing but honor, a man for whom she felt a growing, forbidden affection. But defying Silas meant the ruin and possible death of her father, the one person she had always sworn to protect. Each choice led to a different kind of destruction. Despair washed over her, cold and suffocating. She saw no way out, only sacrifice. She went to the barn that night, her face a mask of anguish. Before she could speak, Tashenko saw the torment in her eyes. "Do not let him break your spirit," he said, his voice firm. He stepped out of the shadows, his resolve solid as the rock of the mountains. "I will not hide any longer. Hiding is a slow death. The best defense is to strike first, to choose the ground on which you fight." His eyes burned with a fierce determination that seemed to push back against her despair. In his defiance, Eliza felt a flicker of hope. He was not just a man to be protected, he was a warrior. And for the first time, she felt she could trust him not just with her secret, but with her life. Tashenko knelt on the hard-packed earth of the barn floor. With a stick, he began to sketch in the dust, his movements precise and confident. He drew the winding, narrow walls of a place he called Coyote Canyon. "Here," he said, pointing to a tight bend in the drawing. "The walls are steep, the path is narrow. A few men can hold off many." He proposed a daring plan, not to run, but to lure El Diablo and his men into a trap they could not escape. He would use their greed and arrogance against them, leading them to believe he was cornered and weak. It was a bold, dangerous strategy, a gamble with their lives as the stakes. Eliza listened, her initial fear slowly replaced by a resolute focus. This was no longer just his fight, it was hers too. She pointed to a high ridge on his map. "If we could loosen the rocks here," she suggested, "we could create a rock slide, block their only way out." Tasha & Co. looked at her with a newfound respect. She was not just a compassionate woman, she possessed a sharp, strategic mind. He nodded slowly. "It is a good thought. It will take careful work. One sound at the wrong time, and the trap is sprung on us." Together they refined the plan, their two minds working as one, a silent partnership forged in desperation. As they worked, a subtle shift occurred between them. The space was no longer just a hiding place, but a command center. They moved with a shared purpose, their voices low as they discussed every detail. One evening, as they huddled over the dusty map, her hand brushed against his as she pointed to a spot. A current, warm and startling, passed between them. They both froze, their eyes meeting over the crude drawing. In that shared glance, an unspoken truth was acknowledged. This fight was not just about survival or land anymore. It was about a future they both, impossibly, hoped to share. The plan was set. They would use one of the ranch hands, a boy loyal to Eliza's father, to spread a rumor in town. The rumor would suggest that the wounded Apache was heading for Coyote Canyon, trying to escape to the mountains with a map to the silver. It was the perfect bait, an irresistible lure for greedy men like El Diablo. Tasha & Co. would make his way to the canyon, leaving a clear trail for them to follow. Eliza's role was just as critical. She and the ranch hand would have to prepare the rock slide, a perilous task that required silence and nerve. Their destinies, and the fate of Barren Gulch, now rested on a desperate plan drawn in the dust. Furious at Eliza's quiet defiance, Silas Blackwood rode not to the sheriff, but towards the desolate hills where El Diablo's men were known to camp. His mind was a cold engine of calculation. If Eliza would not give him what he wanted, he would take it by force. He found the bandits' camp, a squalid collection of lean-tos reeking of stale tequila and unwashed bodies. El Diablo himself, a large man with a scarred face and dead eyes, met him with suspicion. "What does a rich man like you want with us?" the bandit snarled, his hand resting on the handle of a large knife strapped to his waist. Silas did not flinch. He laid out his proposition with chilling clarity. "I know where your Apache is. He is at the Barren Gulch Ranch. The girl, my fiancé, is hiding him." He offered to lead them directly to the ranch, to help them capture Tasha & Co. without a fight. In exchange, he wanted two things: a significant share of the silver from the Apache mines, and complete control over Eliza. "The girl needs to be taught a lesson in obedience," Silas said, his voice dripping with venom. El Diablo considered the offer, a cruel smile spreading across his face. A traitor was a tool he could use. "We have a deal," he agreed. Meanwhile, Lily's adventure had turned into a nightmare. She had successfully trailed the bandit to the same camp, hiding in the rocks and watching. Heart pounding, she saw them unroll a piece of worn hide, a map. Believing this was her prize, she waited for the cover of darkness to try and snatch it. But her inexperience betrayed her. A misplaced footstep, a dislodged pebble, and she was discovered. Rough hands grabbed her, silencing her scream. She was dragged before El Diablo, who looked at the terrified girl with amusement. "Well, well," he chuckled. "What have we here? A little mouse come to play with the cats." Lily was no longer a treasure hunter. She was a hostage, a piece of leverage. Her naive dream of saving her family had delivered her directly into the hands of their worst enemies. Her presence there complicated everything. El Diablo now had a new card to play against the girl at the ranch and her hidden warrior. He realized the girl was the sister of the woman Silas spoke of. He now had two ways to control the situation. The web of deceit and danger grew more tangled, with Lily trapped at its very center, her life now a bargaining chip in a game played by ruthless, greedy men. As twilight fell, Eliza went to Lily's room to ensure she was safe before heading out to the canyon. The room was empty. A cold dread washed over Eliza as she saw the note on the pillow. The words, full of childish scrawl about finding gold and becoming a hero, confirmed her worst fears. Lily was gone. She had run off, chasing a fantasy, completely unaware of the real danger that lurked in the desert. The plan with Tosh Unko, their carefully constructed trap, was suddenly meaningless. The priority had shifted with terrifying speed. Now, it was not about defeating their enemies, it was about finding Lily before it was too late. She ran to the barn, her heart hammering against her ribs. She showed the note to Tosh Unko, her voice trembling as she explained what had happened. He looked at the note, then at Eliza's pale, distraught face. His expression hardened. There was no judgment, only a grim understanding of the new reality. "She has walked into the wolf's den," he said softly. He immediately abandoned the preparations for their ambush. Using his skills as a tracker, he went to the corral. In the faint light, he examined the ground, quickly finding the tracks of the old mare leading away from the ranch. He knew the direction she had taken. The tracks led them towards the very region where El Diablo's men were known to roam, not far from Coyote Canyon itself. The terrible irony was not lost on them. The place they had chosen for their trap was now likely the location of Lily's captivity. "They have her," Tosh Unko stated, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. "They will use her against you." Their plan had to change. It was no longer a calculated ambush. It would have to be a direct assault, a rescue mission against impossible odds. The trap they had so carefully set for the bandits was now threatening to snap shut on all of them. Desperation gave them a new, reckless courage. They had to assume that Silas had already made his move, and that the bandits would be expecting an attack on the ranch. Their only chance was the element of surprise by attacking the camp directly. Tosh Unko gathered his few weapons, his knife, a bow, and a handful of arrows. Eliza secured her rifle, her movements no longer hesitant but filled with a fierce, protective resolve. As they rode out into the encroaching darkness, they were no longer just a woman and a warrior. They were a singular force, bound by a shared purpose, to rescue a foolish girl from the consequences of her dreams. As if the heavens themselves sensed the coming conflict, the sky began to change. The clear, starry night was swallowed by dark, bruised-looking clouds that rolled in from the west. The wind picked up, howling through the canyons, whipping sand and grit into the air. A sandstorm was coming. "The spirits are angry tonight," Tosh Unko murmured, but there was a glint in his eye. This was not a hindrance. It was a gift. The chaos of the storm would be their shield, the howling wind their cover. It would blind and disorient their enemies, while for him, a child of this land, it was just another face of the desert he knew so well. They reached the ridges overlooking the bandits' camp just as the storm hit with full force. Visibility dropped to near zero, the world reduced to a swirling vortex of sand and noise. In the heart of the maelstrom, they could just make out the flickering light of the bandits' campfire. This was their moment. Tosh Unko moved like a phantom, disappearing into the storm. Eliza's job was to create a diversion. From her vantage point, she fired a single shot into the air, the sound swallowed and distorted by the wind. It was enough. The camp erupted in confused shouts, the men firing blindly into the storm. In the ensuing chaos, Tosh Unko struck. He was a whisper in the wind, a shadow in the dust. A bandit would turn, hearing a sound, only to fall with a silent gasp, an arrow finding its mark. Meanwhile, Eliza used the confusion to circle the camp and find Lily, who was tied to a wagon wheel, terrified and weeping. As Eliza worked on the ropes, she heard a familiar voice behind her, filled with rage. "You!" Silas screamed over the howl of the wind. He lunged for her, his face a mask of fury. "You will not defy me. You belong to me." He tried to grab her, his intentions clear and violent. Just as Silas lunged, a shot rang out, this one not from Eliza's rifle. El Diablo appeared out of the swirling dust, his firearm smoking. Silas had not warned him of a trap or a sandstorm. He had been betrayed. "No one betrays El Diablo," the bandit roared, but his victory was short-lived. Tosh Unko emerged from the storm behind him, his knife flashing in the chaotic light. The fight was a brutal, swirling dance of shadows in the heart of the tempest. Eliza, having freed Lily, pulled her sister away from the fray, trying to find safety in the very storm that threatened to consume them all. The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived. As the dust settled, the first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of soft pink and orange, revealing a scene of devastation. The canyon was littered with the debris of the fight. Most of El Diablo's men were gone, either fled or fallen. The bandit leader himself lay still near the extinguished campfire, his reign of terror finally over. A short distance away, Silas Blackwood's body was crumpled at the base of a cliff, a victim of his own desperate attempt to escape in the chaos. His greed had led him to a final, unforgiving piece of earth. Tashunko stood silhouetted against the rising sun. He was bruised and had a fresh cut on his arm, but he was alive. He walked over to Eliza, who was holding a trembling Lily close. The young girl was finally awake to the terrifying reality she had mistaken for adventure. Her tears were not for lost gold, but for the innocence she had lost in the canyon. She looked from her sister to the Apache warrior, a dawning understanding in her eyes of the true meaning of bravery. There were no words of reprimand, only the quiet comfort of her sister's arms and the shared relief of survival. They returned to Barren Gulch as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The ranch, which had seemed like a prison, now looked like a sanctuary. Their father, frail but safe, wept with relief upon seeing both his daughters alive. The threat that had loomed over them for so long had been vanquished, blown away by the storm. The land was theirs, free from the grasping hands of Silas and the shadows of El Diablo. But the victory felt somber, paid for with blood and terror. The world was not the same as it was before, and neither were they. The desert had tested them, and it had changed them forever. Later that day, Eliza stood with Tashankul, looking out at the vast expanse of the Arizona landscape. The path ahead was uncertain. His world was in the sacred mountains, and hers was on this hard-won piece of land. The chasm between their peoples had not disappeared overnight. But as they stood there, side by side, it felt less like a chasm, and more like a valley they could choose to cross. He reached out and gently took her hand. It was not a gesture of ownership, like Silas's, but one of partnership. "We have a new map to draw, Eliza," he said softly. And looking at the sunrise, she knew they would draw it together.